This male lead is truly impressive. In an era where everyone yearned for attack magic, he went against the grain, studying not how to dispel the opponent's magic every day. It was a struggle for control of the 7 magic, but this wasn't the male lead's limit. To hurry along, he casually eliminated the friction between his feet. Immediately, a red magic circle lit up behind him. In his previous life, the male lead was one of the only 7 remaining heroes. Relying on his masterful reverse calculation, he successfully joined forces with his companions to defeat the destruction dragon that the world ultimately lost. However, just as the 7 brave men envisioned a beautiful future, but the heart of the destruction dragon suddenly exploded, and with this, all the heroes were wiped out and the world was on the verge of destruction. The outcome? Looking at his weak and powerless hands, memories of the past flashed before the protagonist's eyes like a revolving lantern. When he roared and opened his eyes again, but he found himself reverting to how he was when he was young. Hearing the academy president announce the official start of the entrance exam, the male lead finally realized it was as if he had lived a second life. But what followed was not excitement, but deep despair. If all of this is true, so what meaning does all his 10 years of desperate battles and the successive deaths of his comrades have? Once the male lead finally managed to get his mood together, he finally faces the entrance exam for the Magic Academy. Just as he remembered, his group was with Abridged, the magic swordsman, and one of the 7 heroes. Also, Romantica, who died in his arms in his previous life, had a simple exam to race toward the front finish line. The top 3 ranked are considered qualified because they are in the virtual space of the shadow world, so the exam allows them to attack each other using magic. As the machine started counting down, the exam finally began. As a magic swordsman, Aegis charged at the very front. The male lead, along with Romantica, is also a magician and can only end up last, because in this world the nobility holds absolute leadership positions. So as a rare profession, Aegis attracted the attention of all the teachers. While the male lead was the only civilian in the group, they didn't even spare a glance. Meanwhile, the romantic car is running. In the grass, he accidentally stepped on a small animal. Seeing how adorable she was, he felt completely lifted. This scene was instantly teased by the male lead. His usual friendly demeanor made the girl feel very annoyed. Yet no matter what he says, the male lead only wears a helpless smile. Now Romantica has become a sensation. At that moment, the male lead suddenly shoved him aside, and in an instant, a fireball flashed right in front of Romantica, and this was exactly the trap set by the students ahead. Seeing that the male lead had ruined his plans, he immediately shot out a fireball. Seeing this, Romantic snapped his wind magic, after colliding with the fireball, unstoppably shot the man dead on the spot. At this point, only 5 people remained. Romantica was still very grateful for the male lead's help, but as a result, the 2 of them no longer owe each other. Seeing the male lead still smiling, Romantica had no choice but to vent her anger on the contestants ahead. He quickly unleashed a sweep of air ahead, and the 3 of them were blocked by the fierce wind at the same time. Just as the 2 or 3 were overwhelmed by the sudden attack, the first place Agist actually split the fierce wind with his sword, while the second place behind him was in a terrible situation. A giant tree rushed toward him and sent him back to the spring. Now, only the players on the court remained, so Romantic no longer cared about the male lead's presence. He advised the male lead to abstain, since the entrance exam quota had already been decided. In response, the male lead decisively refused. Seeing her good intentions being taken seriously, Romantica radiated a terrifying aura. Then, he summoned countless magic arrays and launched an attack on the male lead. However, just when he thought the matter was over, the male lead unharmed, he stepped forward. At the same time, he also scolded the right person. Fang was so frustrated by his various shortcomings in using magic that Romantica was so angry that she opened the magic circle again. At this point, the Romantica players were stunned. You have to know that reverse calculation requires being several times stronger than your opponent to pull it off. The male lead, with the lowest magic level, would never use it, but reality slapped him hard in the face. The male lead once again uses reverse calculation to destroy his magic. Seeing the girl still dazed, the male lead bluntly says he shouldn't waste any more time. He has an even more important enemy to defeat. These words instantly sparked a fierce fight among the romantic characters. He instantly unleashed countless magic arrays behind him, refusing to believe the male lead could destroy so many of his magic. However, the result was obvious. The male lead easily thwarted his attack. Little do they know, the male lead also believes that Romantica is among the best among the freshmen, but that's still far from enough. To avoid repeating the mistakes of his previous life, he had to use this method to stimulate the girl's progress. As the male lead goes all out, Romantica's magic circle quickly vanished into the air. Seeing the girl panting heavily, the male lead walked forward without hesitation. Sun, meanwhile, Agest was gradually approaching the finish line. Unexpectedly, at that moment, the male lead suddenly darted out of the forest. Seeing this, he could only intervene to stop it, but the hero took control of his proud ice magic with just a glance. Agest instantly realized this was reverse calculation. Since that was the case, he decided to decide the outcome before everyone was taken away. However, under this terrifying, relentless assault, the male lead remained motionless until a mushroom cloud exploded. Only then did he stand up with a flesh wound. That male lead is truly awesome. In his previous life, as one of the only 7 remaining heroes in the world, In his near-death moments, he actually returned to where everything began. This time, he no longer chose to keep a low profile. He wants to create a beautiful future with the strongest posture. However, none of this seemed as simple as he had imagined. He clearly won the new title through his own strength. The top spot was assigned to the notorious underperforming class at school. And all of this was simply because of his commoner status. The lofty nobles would never allow such a filthy bloodline even a chance to stand out. Looking at the class placement list posted by the school, the male lead was not surprised at all. At this moment, what he cared about more was romantic beside him. Seeing the girl's extremely embarrassed expression, he indeed followed the male lead to the underperforming student class. The dilapidated classrooms and the musty smell of the space made Romantica feel uncomfortable all over, especially the male lead's constant smile, which made his anger rise even more. However, just as Romantica was pondering how to change the situation, a white-haired man from a noble family suddenly found him. Bai Mao said he was looking for teammates, and his team, Blue Moon, was the top elite team ranked first in the school. And Romantica, who comes from a good family background and has outstanding talent, is his target. For such a windfall, Romantica certainly wouldn't refuse. Unexpectedly, as a condition for recommending him to join the team, Whitehair hopes Romantica can become his girlfriend. This sudden remark left the girl completely stunned. After all, this was their first meeting. Little did he know the moment Bai Mao saw Romantica, he fell in love with him at first sight, especially when he saw Romantica mingling with a bunch of filthy commoners. He couldn't stand it anymore, although Bai Mao's confession seemed sincere. But after all, this is Roman, Tika's lifelong commitment, so he decided to think about it for a while. Bai Mao was not anxious about this. He simply took out a wooden sword and gave it to Romantica, a custom in his hometown for giving to his beloved, looking at the expensive gold necklace inside. Romantica wanted to refuse, but White-haired was very resolute. After giving the gift, he turned and left. Looking at the gold necklace in his hand, Romantica fell into deep thought. Seeing that Romantica had been knocked down by the enemy's sugar-coated bullets, the male lead had no choice but to leave a letter behind. Seeing this, Romantica thought it was a love letter from the male lead. Before he could mock her further, the male lead whispered that if he read it, he would have to destroy it. Although it was a bit baffling, but Romantica still opened the envelope again, only to find the contents were the greatest secret of his life. Meanwhile, the protagonist finally discovers his second target after rebirth, a cute boy named Pulan. In his previous life, Pulan was one of the fastest swordsmen in that battle, and he reached that level without proper training. The male lead believes that in this life, he will definitely make the other person stronger. At that moment, Romantica finally found the male lead. However, just as he started to speak, the male lead stopped him, because the most important thing right now was Pulan's practical exercise. As the exercise began, Pulan chose a great sword as his weapon. This scene instantly left the male lead watching puzzled. Pulan's opponent in this battle was the aristocratic Red-haired. At the referee's command, Pulan quickly raised his greatsword and swung at Red-hair. Under his relentless assault, the Red-hair was forced to retreat step by step. However, after only a few rounds, Pulan was already gasping for breath due to exhaustion. This time, it was Red-hair's turn to attack. The previous battle had clearly made him lose face, so every move he made targeted Puran's vital points. At that moment, Hongmao, suddenly a flaw was exposed. Although the male lead had timely warned her, Pulan still resolutely slashed out. Little did he know, this was a trap set by Red-hair. With his swift counterattack, Pulan's greatsword was knocked flying. Although the battle had already ended, but Hongmao was clearly not satisfied and immediately punched Pulan right away. Seeing this, the male lead hurried over. With the male lead's righteous intervention, he quickly grew close to Puran. Pulan even had the male lead call her by her name. However, when the male lead actually called out his name, but his face was as red as a bubble teapot. In his eyes, the male lead had already turned into a dazzling, handsome man. It is equivalent to the farewell to Pulan. Finally, it was Romantica's turn, and the reason he was assigned to the underperforming class was exactly in that letter. It turned out that Romantica's noble status was bought by his father, who was a merchant. In the eyes of those noble teachers, bloodlines cannot be changed, which is why he is in the same class as the male lead. Afterwards, the male lead suggests that he should not accept White-haired's confession. You have to know, in the mouth of the white-haired man, civilians are all dirty. Once Romantica's secret is revealed, the consequences are predictable. Then the protagonist suggests that Romantica should team up with him. If she refuses, he will have to team up with. Mentioning Pulan's name, Romantica's mind couldn't help but let all kinds of imagination run wild. That kind of adorable child is easy to fall for anyone. But despite her thoughts, Romantica took the initiative. He asked the male lead to confess truthfully. As someone at the lowest ring level, how did he manage to defeat the magic swordsman? And he's always smiling for no reason, which makes him look super suspicious. He also knew his family's situation inside out. Most importantly, what exactly is that reverse calculation? This male lead is truly impressive. No difference, simply because in his previous life he was one of the only 7 remaining heroes in the world. After his rebirth, he began to act recklessly and unrestrained, relying on the memories from his previous life. He effortlessly found 2 promising teammates. One of them is a genius mage who single-handedly takes on bosses. The other was a genius swordsman who could fight through the beast horde 7 times with just a slender sword. Although at this time they were still the little newbies who could only whisper, but the male lead is already satisfied because he has finally taken the first step to change this decaying world. It turns out that in this world, nobles and commoners had irreconcilable conflicts, so much so that many gifted commoners were suppressed by the nobles to the point they could not survive. However, within this Magic Academy, there is a system called the ranking competition where the top 9 players in the finals are awarded the title of Lone King. As long as they receive this honor, those in the underperforming class would undoubtedly be promoted to the elite class. However, since its establishment, no one has successfully upgraded this system, and this is exactly the male lead's goal. As long as he can lead the team to the end, it will become an opportunity to change the Academy's corrupt system. However, achieving this ideal requires great strength. So the male lead decides to give special training to his 2 teammates. However, when they arrived at the training room assigned to them by the Academy, the filthy environment inside left them stunned, although the male lead smiled and said, "Once you stay there for a while, you'll get used to it." But the original owner of the house seemed to disagree with his view. Watching the mice quickly escape from the room, the male lead decided to take advantage of this to do a thorough cleaning. So when the unconscious Poulin woke up, he noticed that the previous demon lair had suddenly gone golden and glowing. Although Romantica had turned gray at this moment, but the male lead still started special training for him without hesitation. First, Romantica needs to improve the accuracy of her magic. Romantica, however, appears especially confident about this. If you don't believe me, he can demonstrate on the spot. Only the bottom is visible. In just 1 second, he cast his magic, summoned several magic circles, and then shot them toward a circle on the wall. Although his shooting accuracy is as high as 25%, it's far from enough for the male lead. You have to know to enter the elite class, he had to hit all the magic circles on target. Romantica said this was simply an impossible task. But the male lead knew very well that not only could the other party do it, but in the future, he could use a powerful magic array to instantly kill massive monsters with a single strike. Although the future Romantica has already shown his talent for now, he is just a proud little girl, so the male lead forces her to accept the task with just a few words. But beyond that, romantic cars, there was also a training exercise, moving the ball in his hand into the front circle. Seeing Romantica about to throw it by hand without thinking, the protagonist quickly reminds him of his identity as a mage. Romantic must use magic to manipulate the surrounding airflow to move the orb. However, Romantica was momentarily puzzled by the male lead's words. So the male lead asked him to imagine what it felt like to manipulate the wind. At this moment, the male lead was overjoyed. No wonder he's his good teammate. Once he mastered the trick. Then he reminded the other party while he hadn't forgotten the feeling from earlier. You need to focus on practicing. With the male lead assigned Romantica's training tasks, it was Poulin's turn next. However, to be honest, as a mage, the male lead had nothing to teach him. After all, Poulin already possessed great strength and would be admired by countless people in the future. This proves this point. Right now, the male lead just wants to know why Poulin used a heavy sword before, when he's best suited for agile rapiers. Although Poulin didn't want to talk about it since it was a matter of the team's combat strength, he still led the male lead back to his room. It turned out that Poulin's father was a nobleman, while his mother was a commoner, and the one in his hand was the one in his hand. The rapier was the only thing his father had left him. At this moment, the male lead immediately recognized that in his previous life, Poulin wielded this rapier to slaughter all around. Poulin first learned about this rapier when he was 6 years old. Driven by longing for his father whom he had never met, Poulin began to practice swordsmanship intensely, hoping that one day when he met his father, he would receive praise from him. However, until the day his mother passed away, all Poulin received was the advice not to seek out his father. It should be noted that for the nobility, giving birth to a child among ordinary people is extremely disgraceful. So if Poulin had rashly gone looking for her, she probably would have passed away by now. However, Poulin truly knew nothing about this matter. He had always wanted to know who his father was. That's why he came to this magic academy filled with nobles. The first thing he did upon arriving here was to have someone appraise the sword, but the other party told him the rapier was worthless. It's simply not something a noble would use. This completely shattered the belief Poulin had always held on to. He had thought that the sword his father left behind because he loved his mother, but now the facts proved he was overthinking it. So he made up his mind never to use this weapon again. By the next day, the male lead stared at Poulin during training, and unusually was stunned. Meanwhile, Romantica couldn't wait to show the male lead the results of her 3 days of training. Although the strike hit the target instantly, unexpectedly, it went out of bounds. But just as Romantica was feeling frustrated, the male lead not only came over, he still stared intently at Romantica, pretending to be thoughtful. It turned out the male lead suddenly remembered the gift White-Haired had given Romantica before. It shares a similar effect with Poulin's rapier, and in the next second, the male lead suddenly realizes and leaves, ignoring the inexplicable romantic moments. The male lead turned to find Poulin, wanting to see the rapier on the other side again. Little did he know, he was rejected by the other party. No matter how much the male lead asks from then on, Poulin just doesn't want him to see it. The male lead was extremely anxious and hurriedly took Poulin to find the unscrupulous merchant. But the situation was different now because the boss was there at the time. It means this item has no value, but in fact it is an empty blade similar to the box nobles used to give to their lovers. Although the owner didn't know how to open it, its value had changed dramatically, rising from 3 silver coins to 40 silver coins. Seeing that Poulin was angered by the boss's ugly attitude, the male lead remained calm as usual and stepped forward to pay without hesitation. Seeing the male lead's straightforward attitude, the boss instantly felt like he was losing out. However, he still chose to pay and deliver the goods in one hand, since these things usually have unique ways to open them. No matter how much outsiders see it, it's useless. However, what he never expected was that the male lead's wall-mounted device actually had X-ray vision. Just one glance, the male lead would know how to open rapier. Then he had Poulin embed his nails into the slot in the hilt. Immediately after, Poulin easily drew the blade hidden inside the rapier. Looking at that dazzling light, Poulin found it hard to believe because this sword looks neither iron nor silver. He had never seen such a shiny metal before, ignoring the boss's expression as if he'd lost his. The protagonist explains that this is a metal called browning, which is stronger than steel and lighter than a feather, and is only used to craft the highest grade equipment. Seeing that the two were about to run after finishing their crossings, the boss directly ordered the burly man at the door to block them. He said that if the male lead and the other want to leave, the sword must be left behind. Although Poulin doesn't like fighting, if anyone dares to harm the male lead, he will never show mercy. Seeing this, the burly man roared and charged at Poulin, but Poulin only rolled nimbly. He easily neutralized the opponent's offensive then. A terrifying aura radiated from him. Looking into Perron's determined gaze, the burly man was instantly interested. After all, what he loved most was fighting the strong. Looking at the shallow wounds on the burly man's body, the male lead instantly realized that Poulin hadn't used details for too long and had lost track of attack distance. However, compared to this, now to make matters worse, the strong man had already gotten used to Poulin's work. If the attack speed drags on like this, the outcome of the battle will likely be far from optimistic. Seeing this, Poulin decisively changed his attack tactic, directly targeting the burly man's vital points. Unexpectedly, because Poulin's intentions were so obvious, the burly man actually took the opportunity to deliver a fierce whip kick to him. This time, Poulin was instantly severely wounded. Seeing this scene, the male lead shouted, "Make him believe in his own father." At the same time, Poulin finally saw the 2 lines of writing carved on the rapier. This time, he was finally no longer confused. Poulin picked up the sword from the ground, ready to continue fighting, feeling the male lead's unfathomable depth. The male lead seemed to know the secret of this sword and the inscription engraved on it from the very beginning. But now for yourself, she only wants to dedicate her victory to the male lead who trusts her. Then Poulin swung his sword and charged at the burly man. Before the man's large axe could come down, he flashed behind him. Then he dashed toward the opponent again. Unexpectedly, the burly man showed a confident smile. Seeing this, the male lead immediately sensed something was wrong. Little did he know in the next moment, as the burly man fell, Poulin finally won the battle. However, just as they were about to leave, the owner beside them actually burst out laughing. You have to know, the gate before them could only be opened by strong men. If they wanted to leave, they had to leave their swords behind. After this incident, Poulin finally reconciled with his father whom he had never met. The male lead thus gains his maxed out favor, and the words on the sword were actually a sentence left to him by Poulin's father. That is, "May my fledgling never lose its way." Meanwhile, Romantica in the training hall was still engaged in intense training. Seeing her magical control unknowingly improve to this level, Romantic jumped up happily again. And this result seemed to make him make up a certain mind. Then he directly sought out Bai Mao, who had confessed to him before. As the attendants brought the delicious food to the table, Romantic was completely unmoved, politely driving away on the spot until there was nothing left on the plate. Only then did he remember the reason he had come here. Then he directly handed over the empty blade that Whiteford had given him. Seeing this, Bai Mao was a bit confused. He thought Romantica was threatened by someone, but it turned out this was entirely Romantica's own thoughts. During this period, the male lead's training helped him regain his confidence. He no longer felt that being a commoner was something to be ashamed of. Upon hearing the words civilian, Whitehaired instantly showed a terrifying expression. If he'd known Romantica was a commoner, he wouldn't have confessed to him. This guy was just as the male lead said. Upon hearing this, Romantica wasn't particularly disappointed. Instead, he told the other party that he and the male lead had planned to be promoted to the noble class. So, from today on, I am an enemy with white hair, and advised the other party not to underestimate them. With Romantica's departure, memories buried for years resurfaced in Whitehair's mind. At that time, a group of rioting civilians not only burned down his home, but even beheaded his father as a public display. All he could do was watch in pain as his father died before his eyes. This male lead is truly impressive, simply because the civilian squad he leads has overcome obstacles one after another. He successfully entered the finals of the Academy's grand competition as a dark horse, becoming a thorn in the side of all the noble professors. So to crush the male lead and the others' food, Professor Delusional directly dispatched the Academy's most elite noble squad to ambush them. And the leader among them is none other than the future demon swordsman Azest, who will be one of the 7 heroes alongside the male lead. Don't be fooled by this girl's usually reserved and aloof demeanor, but as the main attacker in the Brave Squad, she once achieved the great feat of defeating the world's strongest boss, the Destruction Dragon. Yet, even such a terrifying character is helpless against the reborn male lead and is directly toyed with by him during the entrance exam. From then on, he vowed to personally defeat the male lead and wash away the shame of this defeat. However, what Agest never expected was the reason the male lead had to force himself to beat him at the time was all to ignite his fighting spirit. After all, to change the tragic ending of the previous life. Agest must become even stronger. Soon, the day of the finals arrived. Under the witness of thousands of spectators, the 30 strongest first-year students from the academy lined up one by one. This time, the competition venue was the Shadow World, because the requirement to clear the finals was to prevent various historical events that had occurred in the past. So the male lead had already given his companions special historical training the day before. Looking at the shelves full of history books, Poulon and the other were completely stunned. Little did they know they didn't need to worry about it at all, because the male lead who had been reborn already knew the correct answer. As the portal to the world of shadows opened, decision, it officially began to change the school's age-old corrupt system. The protagonist must lead his companions to break through the noble-like lockdown, earn the title of Lonely King, which can only be awarded to the top 9. After everyone enters the portal one by one, the protagonist finds himself in a forest. Since the location is randomly teleported, the protagonist's first goal now is to reunite with his companions. Unexpectedly, at that moment, an icy electric shock suddenly struck the male lead. As the lightning rewinding ice chunks smashed a dent into the tree, a noble-like blue-haired man stepped out from behind the nearby tree. He never expected his luck to be so good, to meet the male lead right from the start. When things didn't click, Lan Mao immediately used a trick. The ice exploded. Although the protagonist blocked it with fire magic in time, the next second Blue-Haired unleashed 2 spells simultaneously. Immediately after, Blue-Hair used defensive magic to freeze the male lead's spell. The male lead didn't expect Blue-Haired to use combination magic. Little did they know this wasn't even the limit of the Blue-Hair. The next second, the flying ice blocks were suddenly swept into a tornado. Seeing the male lead's body scratched by the ice, Blue-Hair instantly became arrogant. He claimed that this kind of magic could be something ordinary people could never learn in a lifetime. Immediately after, he asked if he had any last words to confess. Unexpectedly, the male lead smiled slightly, saying that as a noble like elite, they couldn't even target their own vital points if word got out. Wouldn't that be laughable? Just as Lan Mao was furious and embarrassed, the male lead suddenly snapped his fingers and Blue-Haired's magic circle shattered into pieces. Just as Lan Mao was puzzled, the moment he looked at the male lead, he understood. It turns out the male lead can actually do reverse calculations. The next second, the male lead reclaimed all the magic fragments. Not only that, the male lead never forgets to deliver a witty banter. Never underestimate your opponents on the battlefield, or you'll suffer a crushing defeat. With that, the male lead returned Lan Mao's ice magic one by one. Lan Mao was unconcerned. He was not going to be defeated by the magic of civilians. Immediately after, he then cast a defensive spell. Little did they know the next moment they were proven wrong, and so Blue-Hair was out of the game. There are currently only 29 players left on the field. As for the male lead, but this was just the beginning. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, a man is admiring his magnificent beauty in nature. Unexpectedly, an unexpected event occurred the next second. Compared to the department that sounded at this moment, Unified Broadcast, Poulon is more concerned about where the male lead is. So, to find the male lead, Romantica directly uses probing magic. At this moment, in his perception, there were 2 people ahead and 1 beside him. Seeing this, Romantic did not hesitate to cast a spell on the lonely man, but unexpectedly, the magic collapsed on its own in the next moment. Before Romantica could react, 2 students from the noble class appeared before him. The 2 immediately mocked Romantica as a useless fool, not even knowing that scouting magic would reveal her position to the opponent. Romantica wasn't upset about this at all, since it's still uncertain who will be the loser. If you don't agree, half a sentence is too much, and the next second, Pulan will respond. Purple Hair roared and charged forward, but this round of exchange was clearly insufficient to determine a winner, so the 2 of them tacitly retreated. Seeing this, the blonde directly cast a water spell on Poulon, but the magic posed no threat to Poulon. The extremely high movement speed he displayed at this moment left both of them dumbfounded. Blonde then had to use area magic, unaware that it would reveal his position. The next second, Romantic struck with a single blow, sending it flying into the sky. Seeing this, Zimao was about to lose his temper when a voice sounded behind him. Looking back, he saw Pulin already standing behind him. However, facing a pincer attack, Purple Hair first swung her sword at Pulin. Unexpectedly, it was not just that. Not only did he miss nothing, but the next second, Pulin suddenly fell from the sky, just distracting him. Seeing this, Romantic Dick finished off in time. Zimao was sent back to his hometown. It must be said, with the male leads training, Pulin and the other have visibly become stronger. However, when it comes to the male lead Romantica, just as he remembered something, he immediately started attacking the bushes wildly. At this point, the male lead, who had been watching from the sidelines, had no choice but to step up. Now that the male lead's team had finally gathered, he decided to analyze the situation for his teammates. First, they have two ways to advance to the noble class. One was to clear the hidden world ahead of others, while the other stayed at the end to squeeze into the top 9. First, the first method was ruled out. After all, other teams, they wouldn't be given any time to complete the quest. So for now, they just needed to survive until they reached the top 9. At that moment, a heavy rain suddenly began to fall, forcing the male lead and his group to take shelter under a tree. Watching the male lead with his usual smile, Romantica couldn't help but sigh. Competing with nobles for the top 9 was something he never even dared to dream of before. And if she had really secretly accepted Whitehair's confession back then, I'm sure his fate will be very miserable now. Thinking of this, Romantica couldn't help but take the male lead in a more acceptable light, but she still warned him to put away his signature smile. At this moment, the sudden ringing of the bell caught the attention of all the contestants, and the male lead seemed to have anticipated this. After all, they were all involved. At this moment, I am in the world of the Pribius Clock Tower. Here, a demon appears every so often. At the same time, the system's announcement sounded, and he issued a survival mission. Contestants are required to survive the demon's attack, giving the male lead and his group no chance to react. Suddenly, a large rat crawled out from the ground in front of them. This scene left both Pulon and the others stunned. But this was just the beginning. This giant rat actually had the ability to summon a swarm of rats. The protagonist immediately recognized this demon called the Jidra giant rat that feeds on human blood and can freely control large numbers of rats. The only way to defeat it now is to find the commander among them, so the male lead decisively bites. The broken finger tossed blood into the air. Sure enough, the commander revealed a small horn among the rat pile. The male lead greets the stunned Romantica. Strike immediately. With a gust of wind magic, the giant mouse instantly went out of control. But before Romantic could be happy, the giant rat actually revived fully on the spot. Clearly, Romantica's magic was not enough to eliminate such monsters. Seeing this, just as the male lead was about to call everyone to retreat, suddenly a figure rushed over, watching Pulin's body gradually get swallowed by the rat swarm. The male owner was stunned. Little did they know at this moment, Pulin was indeed achievable. Very calm, he knew he wanted to find that commander. You must concentrate your mind. Romantica's magic would surely leave wounds on the other person, and he was confident he could find them. At this point, only the male lead understands that with the opponent's ability to resist magic, he must not be a simple rat. So he hurriedly searched through the mouse swarm, hoping to catch Pulon. The longer the delay drags on, the worse things get. As time passed, the male lead grew anxious and couldn't help but recall the scene of Pulin sacrificing himself before his eyes in his previous life. But just then, as the clear notification sounded, Pulin fainted from exhaustion. The male lead falls into deep guilt. If he repeated the mistakes of his previous life, no matter what, he would never forgive himself. Fortunately, Pulin was not seriously injured and quickly regained consciousness. At this moment, everyone also noticed that their destination, the bell tower, was not far ahead. The man simply snapped his fingers, and the countless icicles behind him instantly shattered into pieces. The Valkyrie, who saw this scene, didn't have time to be shocked. A raging flame suddenly swept over the spot where he had just been. And this is the true strength the male lead has always been hiding. Yes, he knew that in his previous life, as one of the only 7 heroes in the world, his mastery of reverse calculation made him the nemesis of all magicians in the world. However, the male lead who has been reborn knows well that one person's power is limited. He is determined to become the strongest lonely king in the academy as a commoner. Change this decaying world that has always been dominated by aristocrats. As the finals of the academy competition were nearing their end, the male lead arrived at the middle tower with 2 companions. He was here to deal with the remaining enemies. Meanwhile, the squad led by Abridged also arrived here. Unexpectedly, upon arrival, they were attacked by countless wind magic. Although Abridged, relying on his quick reflexes, quickly activated the ice wall defense, but because of this, his teammate was sent back to the spring. At this point, only 15 people remain on the field, and that's not all the male lead's plan remains. He then ordered Romantica to launch attacks on other squads. As Abridged pushed open the gate of the mid-tower, the tension between the remaining 3 teams on the field instantly reached its peak. They all suspected that the previous sneak attack was orchestrated by Abridged. Although Abridged flatly denied it, the other 2 squads simply refused to believe it. After all, who else could possibly cast magic of that level consecutively besides the Academy's top squad? Seeing this, Abridged instantly understood. Even if he claimed it was all done by a civilian squad, these proud aristocratic students would never believe it. At this point, the male lead finally reached a conclusion for them. The purpose of the mutual killing was to prevent the male lead's plan from succeeding, so Abridged chose to fight alone. Little did he know, this scene only angered Wolftail. Feeling underestimated, he immediately unleashed a blazing ember. Seeing Abridged completely defenseless and engulfed in flames, the other small fry instantly became excited, but the next second, he was kicked away by Abridged's long legs in black stockings. Immediately after, Abridged used an ice wall to seal off Purple Hair's body. Seeing this, Wolftail, having lost 2 key players in a row, called on the green team to help. To address the biggest threat on the field, both teams launched attacks on Abridged, and the sounds of battle between the 2 sides were heard in succession. But the male lead upstairs overhears it. As the voices downstairs gradually faded, the male lead immediately knew his plan had failed, because after all this time, the broadcast hadn't mentioned anyone being eliminated at all, giving Pulan and the other no time to wonder. Suddenly, the crisp sound of high heels echoed from the empty clock tower. The next second, Abridged's squad appeared before them completely unharmed. Since Abridged already knew the male lead's plan, how could he possibly let the male lead and his group reap the benefits? He only used magic to block the small fry's movements and did not send them back to the spring. Now only 2 teams remain on the court, and both sides can finally settle their respective grudges with peace of mind. At this moment, the male lead who had been pushed upstairs by Abridged looked completely incapacitated. However, Abridged saw through his disguise at a glance. Since that's the case, the protagonist stops pretending and directly uses excavation magic to control the stone and attacks the opponent. And Abridged truly deserves to be called a future hero. Although he was injured due to a momentary carelessness, he skillfully used ice magic to resolve the crisis. Little did he know the male lead already knew this would happen. Taking advantage of this moment, he had already covered the entire room with reverse calculation. Seeing this, Abridged showed no sign of panic. He wanted to see if the entrance exam was gone. Such a what other methods can the male lead use? Then, Abridged instantly unleashed a powerful ice spike, attacking the male lead. However, this attack is completely useless against the male lead's reverse calculations, so Abridged immediately changed his approach. He used the wall to quickly approach the male lead, preparing for close combat. However, what he never expected was the male lead merely snapped his fingers and the magic array beneath his feet instantly lost its effect. On the other side, Pulan and Romantica also engaged in a head-to-head battle with their arch-nemesis. Pulan had previously defeated Red Hair, but after several rounds, Red Hair was completely outmatched. Taking the upper hand, Pulan's strength has improved so quickly that even Hong Mao couldn't help but feel puzzled, and Romantic Tika unexpectedly encounters the white-haired man who had previously failed to pursue her. At this moment, Romantica, with little magic left, couldn't help but feel uncertain inside. But just then, the ice wall nearby suddenly crashed down. As the fall shattered to pieces, smoke instantly filled the entire room. Since he saw the other person at this moment, he figured the other party would not see him either. Just as Bai Mao was thinking this, he never expected a spell to strike him precisely. When White-Haired realized that Romantic was coming to him, he had already taken several solid hits. The next second, he understood that Romantic was using the direction of the wind to move forward. He calculated his own location. Just as Romantica was confident of victory, the necklace on White-Hair's chest suddenly emitted a golden light, instantly dispelling the smoke in the entire room. But before Romantica could react, the white-haired sword was already right in front of her. The next second, Romantica was kicked to the ground. After barely dodging several attacks from Whitehair, Romantica finally saw clearly that the artifact Whitehair had just used was the necklace he had given her when he confessed his feelings earlier. Whitehair said proudly, this was not something ordinary people could afford, but in Romantica's view, commoners and nobles made no difference at all. Unexpectedly, these words angered the white-haired man. At the critical moment, Pulan stepped up and saved Romantica, whose magic was exhausted. Pulan also realized that Whitehair's strength was definitely not to be underestimated. Romantica is well aware of this. To avoid holding Pulan back, he suggested he handle Bai Mao himself. The remaining red hair was handed over to Pulan. Little did she know, this little scheme was completely seen through by Pulan. Meanwhile, Agest's icicle was shattered by the male lead, and that's not all. The male lead instantly engulfs Agest with a single fire spell. In desperation, Azus creates a massive icicle to shield himself within. Only then did he barely escape unscathed. But the battle was far from over. This male lead was truly impressive, simply because he had the ability to freely manipulate others' magic. He thus became the nemesis of all magicians in the world, and the Valkyrie, whose magical talent is unmatched across the universe, is no exception, although her domain allows her to cast spells without limits. But this perverted ability is nothing but a joke in front of the male lead. Just now, the decisive battle between the male lead and Agest finally began. Right from the start, Agest pulls out his magic sword to engage the protagonist in close combat, but he doesn't expect what he's thinking. Everything was within the male lead's expectations. Although the male lead's fireballs were all agitated by Agest's agile movements, it didn't stop him from drawing his dagger to counterattack. As their weapons clashed fiercely, Agest was completely stunned. He hadn't expected the male lead to possess impressive close combat skills. Frustrated, he began to launch a frenzied assault on the male lead. However, no matter how hard he tries, he cannot inflict decisive harm on the male lead. After several rounds, Agest couldn't hold back completely. He couldn't understand why, even though his own strength far surpassed the male lead's, he just couldn't defeat him. However, faced with Agest's doubts, the male lead just smiled and asked, "Doesn't he feel very happy right now? After all, someone as powerful as Agest? He probably never had a proper fight with anyone, right? Just like his future self, because he had never experienced the thrill of battle. So he always looks bored. If it were her, she would definitely have a good fight with the opponent." Upon hearing this, Agest admits he truly wants to defeat the male lead, and then starts his ultimate move. As Agest's domain unfolded, a massive ice crystal palace appeared before the male lead. The male lead immediately recognized it as a legendary secret magic, but before he could marvel even once, already seated on the throne, Agest casually waved his hand and a huge icicle appeared beneath the male lead's feet. Although the male lead has tried his best to avoid him, but the ice spike that followed still trapped him firmly in place. The next second, countless magic arrays suddenly appeared in midair. However, faced with such a terrifying attack, the male lead remains calm in the face of danger. After all, his reverse calculation would not cause him any harm. Speaking of which, this ice crystal palace was Agest's trump card before his rebirth. Unexpectedly, he was able to use this trick while still a student. However, even so, with Agest's current strength, his magic simply cannot touch the male lead. At this moment, Agest finally realized he had reached a dead end. In this game, relying solely on swords and magic, he can't defeat the male lead. Just as he was at a loss, he looked at the smooth mirror, as if something had come to mind. Without hesitation, he drew his demon sword and directly dismantled the domain. As compensation, his sword was suddenly wrapped in ice crystals. Seeing this, the male lead instantly became excited, because this technique, called the magic sword, was the ultimate attack only magic swordsmen could use. Generally, it takes more than 10 years of cultivation to master it. Unexpectedly, Agest instantly understood and charged at the demon's sword the next second. The protagonist quickly unleashed a technique called Earth Magic Rock Shatter, sending countless fragments flying toward Agest. Seeing this, Agest, with a swing of the ice sword, the shards of stone turned into blocks of ice and shattered completely. The male lead had no choice but to use fire magic again. Unexpectedly, the moment the flames surrounded Agest, the ice sword broke the spell. Watching Agest slash at him, the protagonist had no choice but to resist with a dagger on the spot, hoping to withstand the blow, but he failed. The next second, the ice sword was already slashing at the male lead's neck. Just as Agest was confident of victory, little did he know the male lead's Sharingan shifted and he revealed a smug smile. It turned out the male lead's reverse calculation had just begun to begin. As the system announcement ended, the male lead ultimately won the match. This feat undoubtedly ignited the enthusiasm of all civilian students. But in contrast, the noble Professor Fatty, who seemed to have eaten filth, angrily threw down the scepter in his hand. He absolutely refuses to accept such a match result. So at a professor's meeting, he declared that the male lead must have cheated. After all, how could a civilian possibly suppress a magic swordsman? And he successfully cleared that world. However, faced with his incompetent rage, other professors demanded that he provide evidence. Just as the two sides were arguing fiercely over this, the dean finally spoke, ordering his subordinates to bring out the list of players selected for the Lonely King of the tournament. At this, all the professors on the field were stunned. Meanwhile, the male lead was talking with Agest. It turns out his plan in the competition wasn't just for the noble classes to kill each other. In addition, he also took advantage of the hostility from other squads. They were led to overlook another way the game ended, clearing the hidden world. All of this is exactly like the entrance exam, facing two identical failures. Agest knew he had completely lost this time. At that moment, Romantica and the other woman also arrived. The male lead praised their role in this competition. Watching the three of them harmoniously and lovingly, Agest smiled knowingly. It was time for him to leave. But just before leaving, he had another unreasonable request. He wanted to join the male lead's training as well. Despite Romantica's strong but the male lead decisively agreed to Agest's request. Seeing the girls smile before leaving, the male lead laughed too. Afterwards, he leads his companions to Professor Brigitte, where they will receive the results of the competition. However, before the results were announced, the professor took it out first. A cake. You have to know, this is no ordinary cake. If you don't book 3 years in advance, you simply can't get the food. Since the professor is bleeding so heavily, that means this male lead never expected. He was just playing tabletop hockey with his harem in the arcade. And because of this, he actually experienced the thrill of a battlefield. A girl uses wind magic to shoot a ball through the opponent's door like a bullet. The other uses ice magic, change the ball's trajectory, and shoot hard, seeing the battle between the two women growing increasingly fierce. The male lead finally couldn't sit still. It turned out that just now, to celebrate the civilian squad's victory in the academy competition, the male lead is pulled by his companions to the mall to relax. However, he had seriously underestimated a girl's desire to look good. Every outfit Romantica changed into was beautiful, and he even praised her at the right moment. But the girl always felt he was just brushing it off. So, to end the nightmare quickly, the male lead decides to start over. Soon, the male lead's retribution arrived. Because Poulon is so serious by nature, when he chose a tie for the male lead, it's impossible to make up your mind in the end. The male lead was forced to do horse hold for 2.5 hours. Even if he frantically signaled to Romantica, the other party also wore a completely helpless expression. After the three finally left the clothing store, the arcade next door suddenly caught their attention. Unexpectedly, the male lead suddenly meets Agest, who is here shopping. So out of politeness, he tentatively invited the other person to join the fun. Unexpectedly, Agest surprisingly agreed. However, when Poulon and the other person saw it at that moment in Agest, they instantly got furious. Seeing this, the male lead was about to offer some comfort, but unexpectedly, Agest made the first move. Facing the Academy's strongest woman, Romantica, he instantly felt a surge of fighting spirit. Little did they know Poulon's aura was even more terrifying. After all, he needed to finish the game quickly and become teammates with the male lead. Perhaps it was because Poulon was composed entirely of warriors with strong physiques, so the male lead immediately falls behind as soon as he arrives. Seeing this, Romantica immediately used wind magic to teach the opponent a lesson. Seeing him so unruly, Agest was fired up too. Then after serving, he quickly used ice magic to change the ball's trajectory. He managed to pull 1 point back for his team. As the battle between the two sides intensified, the male lead seemed to vaguely see the three of them in the future. He was suddenly stunned. After everyone had their fun, the day soon arrived when the male lead was promoted to the noble class. The classrooms here are not only extremely luxurious, they even provide every student with a tablet as a learning tool. Of course, special training before class is still essential, but this time is different. Agest also became one of them. After everyone warmed up together, Poulon started with Agest. Close combat training, followed by Romantica demonstrating how to train control for magic. As the training progressed step by step, their relationship seemed to be gradually improving. Until one day, the male lead suddenly finds Mr. Prey from the elite class. He hoped the other party would step in and entrust his squad to guard the Arelli branch of the magic tower. Of course, Prey would not agree to such a baffling request. Little do they know, the male lead had long been aware of this. Anticipating, he said that in the next 10 hours, outsiders would attempt to seize the mages kept there. This news instantly made Prey restless. You have to know, the mage, as the crystallization of the world of shadows, was able to withstand the erosion of the world thanks to him. Moreover, thanks to the magician processing technology invented by the Lord of the Magic Tower, human lifestyles gradually changed. Therefore, it is easy to imagine how important magicians are to humanity. This made Prey doubt the authenticity of the male lead's information. However, the male lead, who has been reborn and is stuck on the wall, is hard to say much. He simply said there was no time to explain these important things now. If this matter is ignored, the magician will inevitably be taken away. 10 hours later, the headquarters of the Magic Tower in the city-state of Aldia suddenly received news that the Tower Arelli branch had indeed been attacked. But this kid can actually foresee the future. Who exactly is he?